clock on Jake's nightstand glowed softly in the dimly lit room, its digital display blinking the time, 2:22 a.m. He'd been awake for hours, the weight of insomnia pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The outside world was silent, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves against his window. Jake had always been a light sleeper, but lately, nights had become particularly restless. He'd tried everything: meditation, warm milk, even counting sheep, but sleep eluded him. Tonight was no different. He lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite pin down. A sudden noise broke the silence. It was subtle at first, like a soft tapping, barely audible over the ambient sounds of the night. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He strained to listen, trying to identify the source. The sound came again, a rhythmic knocking, unmistakable this time. It was coming from the front door. He sat up slowly, every muscle in his body tense. The house was quiet, too quiet. He knew his neighbors wouldn't be awake at this hour, and no one should be visiting him unannounced. Cautiously, he reached for his phone, the screen still dark from hours of disuse. He tapped the screen, the device lighting up as he unlocked it, and glanced at the time again, 2:22 a.m. With a deep breath, Jake approached the door. The knocking persisted, steady and unyielding. He placed his ear against the cool wood, trying to discern any pattern or clue about who might be there. Nothing. No footsteps, no muffled voices, just the persistent knock. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe a neighbor in need, someone lost? But why the middle of the night? And why so insistent? The logical part of him wanted to dismiss it as a prank or a random noise, but a nagging sense of unease kept him rooted to the spot. Summoning his courage, Jake glanced around his small foyer. The hallway was empty, shadows dancing on the walls from the streetlight outside. He reached for the peephole, hesitating for a moment before pressing his eye against it. The view was just his front porch, no one in sight. Puzzled, he pulled back and checked the windows, confirming that all were securely closed. Deciding to ignore it, he turned to go back to bed, but the knocking resumed, louder this time, echoing through the house. Jake's pulse quickened. He needed answers. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door slightly, just enough to peer outside. The night was dark, the street empty, and yet the knocking continued, emanating from beyond the threshold. There was no one there. Jake stepped back, closing the door firmly. He leaned against it, trying to steady his breathing. The knocking persisted, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound, as if someone was trying to force their way in. Panic began to set in. He glanced around, realizing that his phone was dead. No charger had been connected for days, leaving him without a way to call for help. He reached for the nearest lamp, fumbling in the darkness to plug it in. The room filled with a warm glow, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with every flicker of the light. The knocking ceased abruptly, plunging the house back into silence. Jake exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. Minutes passed, each second stretching longer than the last. He sat there, wide awake, the silence oppressive. Then, just as he began to convince himself it was over, the clock struck 2:23 a.m., and a whisper echoed through the room. "Leave now." Jake froze, every nerve on edge. The voice was faint, barely audible, yet unmistakably clear. He scanned the room, searching for the source, but saw nothing. The lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. He stood up, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Determined to understand what was happening, Jake decided to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, its beam piercing the darkness as he moved cautiously through the house. Each step felt heavier, the air thick with tension. In the hallway, he noticed something out of place. A trail of small, dark smudges leading towards the basement door. His mind raced. Could someone have entered his home without his knowledge? He had always been diligent about locking up, and the house was in good condition with no signs of forced entry. Gathering his courage, Jake approached the basement door. He placed the flashlight against it, the beam illuminating the edge of the stairs descending into the darkness below. The smudges led straight to the door, as if someone or something had been there recently. He hesitated, the urge to retreat battling with his need to uncover the truth. Taking a deep breath, Jake reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch, sending a chill down his spine. He slowly turned it, the hinges groaning in protest as the door creaked open. The basement was pitch black, the air musty and thick with the scent of damp earth. He descended the stairs, each step echoing in the confined space. Halfway down, the flashlight flickered, momentarily plunging him into darkness before the beam steadied again. He pressed on, heart pounding, until he reached the bottom. The basement was empty, save for old boxes and forgotten belongings. Yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. As he stood there, trying to make sense of the smudges and the mysterious knocking, the temperature seemed to drop. His breath became visible in the cold air, and a sense of dread settled over him. Suddenly, the flashlight illuminated a figure standing in the corner, a shadowy presence that seemed to absorb the light around it. Jake froze, unable to move as the figure remained silent, its presence suffocating. The clock upstairs continued to tick, each second amplifying the tension. He wanted to run, to escape the basement and return to the safety of his bedroom, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the figure dissipated into thin air, leaving Jake alone in the basement once more. The silence returned, heavier than before. He took a step back, the flashlight still trembling in his hand, and decided it was time to leave. Climbing the stairs, Jake felt an invisible force pressing down on him, urging him to hurry. He reached the top, slamming the basement door shut behind him and bolting it securely. He leaned against it, gasping for breath, trying to process what he had just experienced. As he made his way back to his bedroom, the clock struck 2:24 a.m. The room was silent once more, the only evidence of the night's events the lingering fear in Jake's heart and the unanswered questions swirling in his mind. Who or what was in his house, and why now? Determined to find answers, Jake knew that sleep would not come easily. The mysteries of the night had only deepened, and he was left to wonder what awaited him in the hours to come. Morning light seeped through the heavy curtains of Jake's bedroom, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind like a persistent fog, refusing to dissipate. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the tension of the ordeal. The clock on his nightstand now read 7:15 a.m., a stark contrast to the unsettling 2:22 a.m. that had kept him awake. Jake swung his legs over the side of the bed, the coolness of the hardwood floor grounding him. He rubbed his temples, trying to soothe the lingering headache from the late-night anxiety. Despite the early hour, his mind was restless, replaying every moment from the previous night with unsettling clarity. The knocking, the whisper, the shadowy figure in the basement. Each memory felt vivid, almost too real. Determined to regain some sense of normalcy, Jake forced himself out of bed and headed to the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a comforting reminder of routine. He poured himself a cup, the warmth seeping into his hands as he took his first sip. But even the rich, bitter taste couldn't fully dispel the unease that clung to him. As he sipped his coffee, Jake's thoughts drifted to possible explanations for the night's events. He considered everything from power surges causing strange noises to someone attempting to scare him as a practical joke. But deep down, a nagging doubt persisted. There was something more to what he had experienced, something beyond the realm of ordinary explanations. Deciding that he couldn't ignore what had happened, Jake resolved to investigate further. He began by checking his phone, which was now fully charged after a night's rest. The screen displayed several missed calls and messages, none of which seemed out of the ordinary. He scrolled through his notifications, but nothing stood out as significant. Next, he turned his attention to the basement door. Earlier that night, the smudges and the mysterious presence had left him shaken. He made a mental note to inspect the basement more thoroughly, perhaps even rearrange it to eliminate any potential hiding spots. But before he could take action, his phone buzzed with a new message. "Unknown number. Are you awake?" Jake frowned, the message appearing at 9:03 a.m. He hesitated for a moment before replying, his fingers hovering over the screen. After a brief pause, he typed, "Who is this?" and sent it, his heart rate quickening. Almost instantly, a reply came through. "Unknown number. You don't remember me? But I've been watching." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He stared at the message, trying to recall any possible connection, but nothing came to mind. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense than before. Deciding to take precautions, Jake began researching similar experiences online. He discovered numerous stories of individuals encountering unexplained phenomena in their homes. Persistent noises, apparitions, and unsettling messages. While some attributed these experiences to psychological stress or environmental factors, others believed in more supernatural explanations. As the morning progressed, Jake's anxiety only grew. He decided to implement some safety measures, installing additional locks on his doors and windows, setting up motion-activated lights around his property, and even considering a security camera system. The practical steps provided a semblance of control, but the underlying fear remained. By midday, Jake had scheduled an appointment with a local electrician to inspect his home for any electrical issues that might explain the strange occurrences. He also reached out to a friend, Maria, who specialized in home security systems, seeking her advice and assistance. Later that afternoon, as he awaited the electrician's arrival, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being observed. He glanced around his apartment, noting every shadow and movement with heightened vigilance. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets mostly empty, and the sun casting bright light through his windows. When the electrician arrived, Jake explained the situation in detail. The technician, a middle-aged man named Tom, listened attentively before beginning his inspection. They checked the wiring, the electrical panels, and the various outlets, but found nothing out of the ordinary. "Everything seems to be in order," Tom concluded, his brow furrowed with concern. "If it's not an electrical issue, we might need to look elsewhere." Jake thanked Tom, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. The lack of a tangible explanation only deepened the mystery. He exchanged contact information with Maria, who promised to visit later that evening to discuss possible security upgrades. As the day turned to evening, Jake tried to distract himself with work and mundane tasks, but the events of the night continued to occupy his thoughts. He noticed small, unsettling things. Items slightly out of place, the sound of footsteps in the hallway when he was alone, and fleeting glimpses of shadows that vanished when he turned to look. At 6:45 p.m., Maria arrived, her presence a welcome reassurance. They discussed various security measures, from installing cameras to reinforcing entry points. Maria was thorough, suggesting practical solutions that could help Jake feel safer in his home. Her expertise and calm demeanor provided a much-needed sense of support. As they worked together to implement some of the recommended changes, Jake felt a temporary relief. The additional locks and lights seemed to deter his unease, and the presence of a trusted friend offered comfort. However, as the night approached once more, Jake couldn't help but wonder if the disturbances would resume. That night, as the clock approached midnight, Jake made an effort to relax. He engaged in a calming routine, reading a book, practicing deep breathing exercises, and even meditating to quiet his racing mind. Gradually, he felt the tension ease, and sleep began to claim him once more. But just as he was drifting into a peaceful slumber, his phone buzzed with another message. Unknown number. Time to leave. Jake bolted upright, his heart pounding. He glanced at the clock. 11:57 p.m. The message was clear, yet its meaning remained elusive. Who was this person? Why were they targeting him? Determined to uncover the truth, Jake decided to take a different approach. Instead of waiting for another incident, he would proactively seek answers. He began by reviewing the basement once more, this time with Maria's help. Together, they meticulously inspected every corner, searching for any signs of intrusion or hidden devices. Hours passed without incident, but the tension remained palpable. As midnight approached, Jake felt a growing sense of apprehension. The house was quiet, the security measures in place, and Maria had left, assuring him she'd be available if anything happened. He settled into bed, determined to face whatever awaited him with newfound resilience. At exactly 2:22 a.m., the clock began to glow softly, its digital display illuminating the room with an eerie light. Jake's eyes snapped open, immediately alert. The room was silent, save for the steady tick of the clock. He took a deep breath, attempting to steady his nerves, when he heard it. A faint tapping, barely audible but unmistakable. His pulse quickened as he recognized the sound. The same rhythmic knocking from the night before. But this time, Jake was prepared. He reached for his phone, ensuring it was fully charged and connected, ready to call for help if necessary. He stood up, moving cautiously toward the source of the noise. As he approached the front door, the knocking intensified, more urgent and persistent. Jake glanced around, noticing the motion-activated lights outside had been tampered with. Some were flickering, others remained dark. A surge of adrenaline propelled him forward as he placed his ear against the door, trying to discern any pattern or clue. Suddenly, the whisper echoed through the room once more. "Leave now." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, the words slicing through the silence with unnerving clarity. He steadied himself, determined not to show fear. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door, the flashlight in his hand cutting through the darkness outside. The night was still, the street deserted, and yet the knocking persisted, emanating from the other side of the threshold. Jake scanned the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of a visitor, no movement, just the relentless knock. Frustration mounted as he realized the message wasn't about a physical presence. It was as if someone or something was trying to communicate, using the very structure of his home as a medium. Jake shut the door firmly, his mind racing to make sense of it all. He retreated to his bedroom, locking the door and securing the windows once more. The clock struck 2:23 a.m., and the room remained silent, save for the faint hum of the outside world. Jake lay back on his bed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the message was a warning he couldn't fully comprehend. Determined to find answers, Jake decided to delve deeper into his home's history. He spent the next few days researching the previous owners, searching public records, and even visiting the local library for any archived news articles or reports. What he discovered was both surprising and unsettling. Several decades ago, the house had been the site of a tragic incident. A family had mysteriously disappeared without a trace, leaving behind their belongings and a home frozen in time. The police had investigated, but no leads had ever emerged, and the case remained unsolved. Over the years, neighbors had reported strange occurrences, unexplained noises, flickering lights, and a pervasive sense of unease. As Jake pieced together the history, he couldn't help but draw parallels to his own experiences. The persistent knocking, the whispering messages, the shadowy figures. It all seemed to echo the unresolved mystery of the past. The realization that he might be connected to something long forgotten only deepened the enigma surrounding his home. Armed with this new information, Jake reached out to a local historian, Dr. Eleanor Hughes, hoping to gain further insight. Dr. Hughes was an expert in local folklore and historical anomalies, and her reputation for solving cold cases was well known. When Jake met with Dr. Hughes, she listened intently as he recounted his experiences. Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she processed the information. "It sounds like you're dealing with residual energy," she explained. "Places with traumatic histories can sometimes retain echoes of past events. It's possible that the spirits of the missing family are trying to communicate or find closure." Jake felt a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Is there anything I can do to help them move on?" Dr. Hughes nodded. "There are rituals and practices that can help. It might also be beneficial to bring in a professional medium who can facilitate communication. Understanding their story could be key to resolving whatever is happening." Encouraged by this new direction, Jake agreed to seek out a medium. He spent the following days coordinating with Dr. Hughes, gathering information about the family who had disappeared, and preparing his home for any forthcoming interactions. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He welcomed Dr. Hughes and the medium, a woman named Lila, into his home. Together, they began the process of connecting with the lingering spirits, hoping to unravel the mystery that had haunted his nights. As midnight approached, the room filled with a palpable tension. Lila began her work, her voice steady as she channeled messages from the beyond. The atmosphere grew heavy, the air thick with anticipation. Then, at exactly 2:22 a.m., the clock's glow intensified, and the familiar tapping began once more. But this time, Jake wasn't alone. Dr. Hughes and Lila remained calm, their presence a stabilizing force amidst the chaos. Lila closed her eyes, her hands gently resting on Jake's shoulders. "I sense a presence," she began, her voice soft yet clear. "They're trying to reach out, to tell us something important." The knocking grew louder, more insistent, as if responding to Lila's invocation. Jake felt a surge of determination, ready to face whatever revelations awaited him. The room seemed to hold its breath, the boundary between the living and the departed momentarily blurred. As the clock struck 2:23 a.m., Lila spoke again, her voice intertwining with the whispers of the unseen. "They want you to know the truth. There's unfinished business here, something that binds them to this place." Jake listened intently, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. The shadowy figures, the persistent messages, the eerie occurrences, all were part of a larger, unresolved narrative. Determined to uncover the truth, he knew that the journey was only beginning, and the mysteries of his home were far from being fully unveiled. The room was thick with anticipation as midnight approached once more. Jake, Dr. Hughes, and Lila sat in a tense silence, the only sound the steady ticking of the clock that had become both a harbinger and a centerpiece of their investigation. The air seemed to vibrate with unseen energy, the boundary between the present and the past growing ever thinner. Lila took a deep breath, her eyes closed as she entered a meditative state. "I'm connecting," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel their presence growing stronger." Jake glanced at Dr. Hughes, who gave him a reassuring nod. The historian had spent her life delving into the obscure and the unexplained, and her expertise provided a crucial anchor in this ethereal endeavor. As the clock struck 2:22 a.m., the familiar glow emanated from its display, casting elongated shadows that danced across the room. The tapping began again, more forceful and urgent than before. This time, however, it was accompanied by a soft, melancholic melody, like the distant strains of a forgotten lullaby. Lila opened her eyes, her gaze steady. "They're trying to communicate through sound," she explained. "The tapping and the melody are forms of expression, remnants of their existence tied to this place." Jake felt a surge of determination. "What do they want us to know?" Dr. Hughes leaned forward, her fingers interlaced. Based on the historical records, the family that disappeared here had ties to a local legend, a hidden chamber within the house that was said to hold secrets too dangerous to be revealed. It's possible that whatever happened to them is connected to this chamber. Jake's heart pounded. A hidden chamber? I've never found anything like that in my basement. Lila nodded slowly. There may be a concealed space that has remained undisturbed. The spirits might be trying to guide us to it, to uncover what lies beneath. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake agreed to conduct a thorough search of his home. With the help of Dr. Hughes and Lila, they began to examine every nook and cranny, looking for any signs of the elusive chamber. Hours passed, and fatigue set in, but their resolve remained unshaken. Finally, in the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old wooden crates, Jake noticed a slight irregularity in the wall. A faint draft hinted at a hidden passage. Heart racing, he called Lila over, who immediately sensed the significance of the find. Using a combination of force and careful probing, they managed to reveal a concealed door embedded within the wall. It was old and weathered, the wood swollen from years of neglect. With a collective effort, they pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Jake hesitated for a moment, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Dr. Hughes placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We need to see what's down there. It's the only way to understand what happened." Armed with flashlights and a cautious resolve, they descended the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the oppressive silence was almost tangible. At the bottom, they entered a small, dimly lit chamber. The room was lined with old books, dusty artifacts, and a large, ornate mirror standing against one wall. The mirror caught Jake's attention immediately. Its surface was tarnished, but as he approached, he noticed faint inscriptions etched into the frame, symbols that Dr. Hughes recognized from historical texts. These symbols are part of an ancient protective ritual, Dr. Hughes explained. They were meant to seal away something powerful, something that shouldn't be disturbed. Jake moved closer to the mirror, feeling an inexplicable pull. As he gazed into its surface, the room seemed to shimmer and warp, the reflections distorting into scenes of the past. He saw the family that once lived here, parents and children, their lives abruptly halted in a moment of terror. A sudden chill swept through the chamber, and the temperature plummeted. The tapping resumed, now echoing from all directions, accompanied by the mournful melody. The spirits were restless, their unfinished business intertwining with the present. Lila stepped forward, her voice steady. "We need to help them find peace. There's unfinished business that's keeping their spirits bound to this place." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of their mission. "What do we need to do?" Dr. Hughes examined the symbols around the mirror. "We need to perform a counter-ritual to release whatever was sealed away. It requires precise steps to ensure we don't unleash something even more dangerous." As they prepared for the ritual, Jake felt a mix of fear and hope. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the spirits watching their every move. Following Dr. Hughes' instructions meticulously, they began the incantations, the words resonating with ancient power. The mirror shimmered, the surface rippling like water. Images of the past overlapped with the present, the family's final moments playing out in a haunting tableau. The room grew brighter, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the spirits began to communicate more clearly. One by one, the family members appeared, their expressions a blend of sorrow and longing. Jake approached the mirror, feeling a connection that transcended time. "We're here to help you," he said softly. "Tell us what you need." The eldest of the family, a man with weary eyes, reached out as if to touch Jake's hand. "We were trapped," he whispered, "bound by fear and darkness. The chamber, it was meant to protect, but it became our prison." Lila responded through the medium of the ritual. "We can free you. Let your spirits find peace." The man nodded, his form beginning to fade. "Thank you," he murmured, his presence dissipating into a gentle light that enveloped the room. One by one, the family members followed, their spirits ascending like wisps of smoke into the ether. As the last spirit vanished, the room was filled with a serene calm. The tapping and melody ceased, replaced by a profound silence that felt like a sigh of relief. The mirror's surface returned to its normal state, the inscriptions now glowing softly with a warm light. Jake, Dr. Hughes, and Lila stood in the chamber, absorbing the significance of what they had just accomplished. The oppressive weight that had hung over the house was lifted, replaced by a sense of closure and tranquility. Dr. Hughes smiled gently. "They're free now. The house should be at peace." Jake felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over him. "Thank you both. I couldn't have done this without you." Lila placed a hand on his shoulder. "It was a team effort. Sometimes, the unknown requires us to come together and face it with courage and compassion." As they made their way back up the hidden staircase, the first light of dawn began to filter through the basement window, signaling the end of a long and harrowing night. The house, once a place of fear and mystery, now felt like a home filled with the promise of new beginnings.